Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Community Issues here at ATN Bangla UK. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're doing a profile interview with Professor Michael Keith. Professor Michael Keith is a professor at Oxford University. He has also been the former leader of London Borough of Tower Hamlets. In tonight's interview, I'm hoping that we will highlight the achievement that was made under his leadership and some of the struggles that the community had went through and how he resolved those issues. Professor Michael Keith, first, can I thank you on behalf of ATN Bangla UK and in particular my program Community Issues for making the time to come and join me here at this program. I know you're very busy, and despite your busy schedule, because of our friendship, you've agreed to do this interview, and I know you don't do many interviews. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Well, Doris, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here with you. So.
Thank you, Michael. Can I first start off by asking you where you were born? Give us a little bit of history about your academic
background
achievements and
well,
how you got into politics.
I got into politics by accident, I think. Really, I was born in Battersea. My mum was actually born in Whitechapel in the Royal London Hospital many years ago. She's still alive. She's 96.
Fantastic.
Her dad was actually the head of the River Police in Wapping. As it happens, although his dad had been a drunken Irish docker who died, leaving my grandfather to bring up his 7 younger siblings, and he had to look after most of his life. He became a policeman. He was momentarily quite well known because he was the person who invented 999, actually, oddly enough. But
fantastic.
He was the head of the River Police in the 1930s and 1940s. My mum was born here. My dad was born in Calcutta, so I used to joke that obviously in Calcutta in the 1930s.
Right. So, is that because your grandfather was out there?
My grandfather was my dad's dad was conscripted into the army in the 1914 and was invalided out of the army and sent to India, and actually in 1914, and was working in India from 1914 until about 1950. So my dad was born in Calcutta, and
so he was born and raised there, was he?
He was born in what was then Bengal. So he said he used to have an ayah. So politically it was quite interesting. My dad used to say that his first words were actually in Bengali. And so my mum was Irish, and her dad was from Wapping, and my dad had a Bengali trace to his life. So it seemed appropriate, I think, that fate brought me to Tower Hamlets, because it was sort of where I belonged. But the reason I came here was I had been in the Labour Party a long time, but I hadn't been involved that much in politics. I did a lot of work with young people who got into trouble with the police in various parts of the country, but I then got, in the late 1980s, I got a job at Queen Mary, and I did some voluntary work with an organisation called Kappa at the time. I met friends, some people who are still friends, people like John Pandit, actually, went on to join Asian Dub Foundation and others. He's still a good friend who was involved in Kappa, and in that way I got drawn into various things, particularly near Stepney, on the ocean, near where Queen Mary College is, on the Ocean Estate. So I was on a charity called the Dame Collett House Foundation for a while.
Yes, I remember that.
And I helped some of the young people set up some youth organisations there, and did voluntary work in various places with young people who got into trouble with the police.
So in terms of your...
and that was in the late 80s, really.
I will come into your community works and some of the projects, the pioneering projects that you've set up, and your political achievements. In terms of your academic achievement, did you go to school in London, or...?
I went to school in London. I went to university. I finished school at 16. I took my A-levels at 16. And then I was lucky enough to get into university, and I studied as an undergraduate and a postgraduate at Oxford. So I got my doctorate at Oxford.
So
I
you got
then
your
worked.
PhD at Oxford.
I did my PhD at Oxford. I got a job in Liverpool for a while, in Warwick for a while, and then I got a job in Queen Mary when I was in my 20s, late 20s, basically.
Right.
And so that was how I came here, and my accidental involvement in politics was really because,
So it was after you started working in Queen Mary that you got involved with the community and
particularly, yes, I mean, because I was doing work mostly, as I say, around Brick Lane with kids who were getting into trouble with
trouble
police.
into police.
There
Yeah,
was some
Kappa.
there were some bad things happening at that time with young people being treated badly, the police arresting people wrongly, but also some unpleasant things by some of the youth club leaders and the way they treated young people that was
Sure.
troubling at the time.
Sure.
And there was also a real problem in the Ocean Estate where young people were beginning to take drugs, and there were a lot of drugs agencies at that time in the East End, but they tended to cater mostly for white people. It was not
For the
overt
Bangladeshis or
discrimination,
the community at
but
large.
yeah,
Yes.
but mostly because a lot of the white people who had problems with drugs were poor and broke and just ended up in East London.
Sure.
Whereas some of the young British Bangladeshi
Sure.
kids were getting into
Into
drugs a
trouble.
little bit because in some ways it was easier. Rather than go home smelling of alcohol, people started doing drugs, which young
Sure.
people do.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a charity set up at the time, which I did help some people with some of the writing to try and address the needs of.
What was the charity called?
It was called Asian Drugs, ADF, I think,
Asian Drug
Asian Drugs
Foundation or
Foundation. I
something.
think it was ADF.
Fantastic.
But that was also associated with some of the work done by people at Dame Collett
You
House at that
also,
time.
sorry, you also worked in Goldsmith University for a while
I
before
was
going
at
to
that
Oxford
time, yes.
University.
After I was at Queen Mary, and then after Queen Mary, I went to Goldsmiths in the early 1990s. So I was in
Right.
Queen Mary for about 5 years, and that was when people like Maqsood Sheikh actually were working on the Ocean Estate, doing some amazing work, who kind of dragged me into various things to do. And at that time, the Tower Hamlets was run by a fairly pernicious Liberal Party regime that
Yes, there were 7 neighborhoods then.
There were 7 neighbourhoods. They had the idea that they would bring government closer to the people, which I think was well intentioned. But what it did was effectively divide up the borough into 7 areas that became like the 7 Bantustans of East London. It was like a
Sure.
kind of almost an apartheid regime, because what meant was, apart from being very wasteful, so there was like 7 chief executives, 7 town halls, 7 heads of finance, 7 chief lawyers.
When was the first time that you got elected as a councillor?
The first time I got elected as a councillor was in 1994.
Isn't that the time when a BNP, British National Party candidate got elected in Millwall?
Well, what happened was, because of dividing up the borough, basically, it was almost as though it was trying to keep the west of the Bangladeshis in the west of the borough and keep the east of the borough white, particularly Bow and the Isle of Dogs. And actually, at that time, a Labour campaigner ran a campaign, Island Homes for Island People, which was basically code for white homes for white people. And as a result of promoting racism, actually, it was the Labour Party that did that at that time. But the British National Party, a fascist party, won its first ever election in 1993, just before 1994. Somebody called Derek Beacon was elected, which shocked the whole of the country, that the fascists, for the first
Managed to
time
get a
ever
seat.
in British
Yeah.
history, had won a seat at the
Yeah.
council election.
Professor Michael Keith, I'm just going to stop you here because we need to go on a short break. We'll be back after the break and we'll continue. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't go anywhere. We're going to go on a short break. We'll be back very soon. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying with us. We are back from our short break. Tonight, interview is with Professor Michael Keith, who is a professor at Oxford University, and he was also the former leader of London Borough of Tower Hamlets. I am so grateful to him that despite his busy schedule, he's managed to make the time to attend my program. So, Professor Michael Keith, before we went on break, I asked you about your background, your educational achievement, and the fact that how you got into politics. You said that you got into politics in 1994.
Well, no, in the late 80s, early 90s, mostly, gradually.
Yeah. But in
I,
terms
I,
of
I was
being
formally
elected,
elected in 1994.
1994. And we talked about the fact that there was a first British National Party candidate that was elected in Millwall. Moving on from there. So in 1994, when Labour regained power after defeating the Liberals, which divided Tower Hamlets into 7 neighbourhoods, which you quite rightly said. From 1994 to 2006, you were a elected councillor in London Borough of Tower Hamlets.
Right.
I had the opportunity to join you as a councillor from 2002 to 2006, when we both got booted out. In terms of your achievement, well before I joined the council, can you just give us a little bit of breakdown, and I will poke you in terms of getting some information out in terms of specific projects.
Yeah.
Can you give us a rundown of your achievement from 1994 to 2006? Let's start with the first.
Well, Doris, could we start just with the context, do you think, a little bit?
Okay.
Because I think
All right,
what
the
I
first-
always say, I mean, I don't think any of the achievements are mine. I say always that, it's a cliche, but
It's a teamwork.
there
yes.
is no I in we.
Yes, of
and I
course.
think anything that was achieved with people
With the
and by
people.
working with people.
Yes,
So
yes, absolutely.
even if we just go back, even momentarily to the election, I think it's quite important that
Yes,
that the election of the fascist party in Tower Hamlets really was a shock. And so that was why it seemed to me that the town hall became suddenly more important.
yes,
And so I became involved in the politics of Wapping Ward in particular.
yes.
And Wapping Ward was, and at that time there were people that I knew who'd been shown letters saying that the Labour Party was full when Bangladeshi people applied.
Yes,
And so there was a history of very overt discrimination in the near past. And I think what was interesting about Wapping was that was one of the places where there were a number of people who were charismatic, who were involved and committed going back to the 1970s, people like Rajunuddin Jalal, who was influential, was a councillor there. At that time, because of the way the neighbourhood system worked, there were 3 councillors, all Bangladeshi. And people actually, including Jalal specifically, said that, for that to be better, they needed to build the ward with more than just Bengali councillors in Wapping, but then Bengali councillors and white councillors elsewhere. So there was actually a fight in Wapping where everyone agreed that it shouldn't be all Bengali, but actually it should include white and Bengali.
But
and I think that point is really important.
Of course.
And that meant that the first election in 94 was when I was campaigning in Wapping. And then there was a death.
In Wapping, or
well, no, that was in Wapping actually. You see, but very shortly after the election in '94, there was the death of a white councillor in Shadwell, Albert Lilly, exactly, who'd served a very long time.
Yes.
And again, Shadwell Ward also by that time had a majority of Bangladeshi members, and so those members could have decided at that time there were 2 Bangladeshi members already, Abdul Shakur and Badrul Alam were sitting in the ward, and they could have decided to have a 3rd Bangladeshi as well. But at that time, people like Shakur Bhai, people like Jalal Bhai, they were saying we need to work together across And so they kindly asked me, put some pressure on me to stand in the election shortly after the election in Shadwell. So
Yes.
I then
You got
stood in
elected.
Shadwell and was lucky to come quite shortly after the 94 election.
Yes.
In the general election, it was the first election after the
The
election
local
on the
election.
Isle of
Yeah.
Dogs, first
Sure.
by-election.
Sure.
And so that was the start. And I think it's important to say that at that time, the Labour Party locally had a very strong faction that were very much left-wing, led by one person called Christine Shawcroft, and very strong right-wing, led by somebody called John Biggs.
John Biggs, yes.
And a small group of about 11, 12, 13 Bangladeshi councillors who were not necessarily wanting to be with one or the other, left or right, but almost stood in the middle.
Sure.
And were being treated quite badly, I
Right.
thought, particularly by the right at that time. And so that was a history of separation again.
Yes.
And so the point is, I think everything that came from that over the next 10 years was against separation in the Labour
Of
Party,
course, of
against the
course.
fascism of what had come before, and trying to say that the only way that things will work properly in somewhere like Tower Hamlets is if the Bangladeshis, the white people, the black people
You
actually
mentioned
work
the
together.
fact that there was the left was led by Christine Shawcroft and the right was led by John Biggs.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think Dennis Toomey.
Yes. So if
The
effectively,
compromise was Dennis Toomey
If-
that became the leader, wasn't it? Is that right?
effectively that's right. I think the most obvious split was that some people had had some experience working in the voluntary sector, and the people who'd worked with the community and saw the realities of the community were less ideologically on one side or the other,
Sure.
and worked, and that included someone who was very honourable, I think Dennis Toomey, who it was such a poisonous atmosphere in that first year after 1994 that after a lot of fighting, Dennis Toomey came forward as a compromise.
To stand as a leader, right?
And I worked with Dennis quite closely
To-
at that time.
Sure.
And that was the start of
That
doing
was a
things.
turning point, yes.
But also with, all of that involved the Bangladeshi councillors. There were other people like Shanar Ali, people like Soiful Alam at that time, who also need to be remembered, because
Sure.
those people were a small group. And if Jalal was the most charismatic leader, all of the others also had strong voices.
Of course,
None of
of
those
course,
people
of course.
were short of
So
coming
unity
forward.
was very important at the time to get all the councillors together.
Yes. I mean,
towards
effectively,
a
we used to
common
say that the elections at the end of each year tended to be always on a very tight,
yes.
difference between one grouping and another grouping.
Another grouping, yes.
And actually, I mean, I always used,
Please forgive me if I'm being obstructive, but I'm not being obstructive. It's just I'm time conscious. I'm going to ask you about 1995, where you led the first regeneration committee
Yes.
in London Borough of Tower Hamlets. And in particular, there was 3 separate regeneration committees. One was for Cityside, which was Spitalfield. The second one was for Lee Valley. And the third one was for the Isle of Dogs. Under those regenerations committees, can you tell us how the borough moved forward and how you managed to get the resources that were so badly needed?
I mean, that's very close to the fact that they weren't actually separate committees, but they were separate areas that we said we would focus on.
Right. Okay.
For regeneration, because Tower Hamlets was in desperate need of regeneration. And to do the simpler ones quickly, on the Isle of Dogs, you had this beast that was Canary Wharf, that was seen as landing in the area, and how you tried to develop relationships with that beast for the benefit of all, rather than just the big development was one thing. Along the River Lee, you had a large patches of old manufacturing land, and the end of that story was getting on for 11, 12 years later, when you ended up with a bid for the Olympics and massive regeneration of the River Lee. More straightforwardly, the other area that was incredibly broke was the area immediately adjacent to the city, one of the strongest concentrations of wealth, cheek by jowl with one of the strongest concentrations of poverty, particularly Bangladeshi poverty. And it was seen mostly in terms of stigma. And what we tried to do right the way through, and it was always was think about actually celebrating that presence rather than stigmatizing it. So there were a series of things that happened over the first few years of the Regeneration Committee. In terms of getting money, there was something called Bethnal Green City Challenge, which had done some good things, but was also highly contentious, a lot of arguments around it. We tried to get we succeeded in getting a regeneration company together that then had money for various things. So again, there were key characters involved in this. What happened was that the council supported not just Alta Bali Park being renamed, but also the Shahid Minar was created as a monument replicating the Shahid Minar in Dhaka, and became a site for the community to celebrate. And it's been that park has been renovated since. But also it was the case that a long time ago, Bangla Town as a name, people have forgotten this. It was actually a term of abuse. That was when it was first used. It was actually a racist term.
That was in what,
initially.
1996,
In the
97?
80s, no, in the 80s it was talked about in very racist terms. Bangla Town was where a lot of the white people talked about, this is where the Bangladeshis live, in a not nice way.
Right.
And it turned a term of abuse into a celebration of what was there, which was an incredibly successful catering industry, but also increasingly a kind of cultural attraction for people to come and spend money.
Yes.
And so that meant, and on this particular issue, Jalal was the lead at the time because he became very involved in regeneration as well shortly afterwards. And so, it was always a we, and that Bangla Town was then created as an entity to try and boost the economic activity in that area.
Sure.
And make sure that instead of having the city spreading east and overriding the whole of the east and displacing all of the Bangladeshi community, that we actually preserve that space as somewhere both to live and to work.
To work, yes.
So the idea was that you actually renovated the housing so that people could have somewhere decent to live rather than be forced out.
Yes.
But also you tried to place a marker on the map along Brick Lane and call it Bangla Town, almost as a block for the city just spreading eastward and wiping out the Bangladeshi community.
Sure. Displacing the local community.
Exactly, and trying to stop that displacement was precisely the object of that campaign for regeneration. And if I look back now to 1994, many of those things were objected to. There was a lot of opposition to Bangla Town. There was opposition to the regeneration that was done there. And if you look there now, obviously there are pressures on price, there are pressures on housing markets, but it is still recognised as the heart of the British Bangladeshi community.
Of course.
And I think that's really important, that was the heart of that regeneration strand of work.
The Rich Mix Centre, when did that come along?
So, well, the idea of the Rich Mix actually also came about originally precisely as a result of that 1993 election of the fascists, that what was seen at the time was that multiplicity, multiculturalism were seen as bad things, and that minorities were seen as problematic. A number of people, again, that included people like Nisar Ahmed at the Community Development Centre, the CDT, the Community Development Trust in Brick Lane, were promoting the idea that what should happen was that there should be not a stigmatization of the mix of cultures that you saw in East London, but a celebration of that mix.
Of course, bringing different sections
bringing
of the
different people
together,
but also exactly recognizing that it could be troubled, but trying to create a space by which people came together in what did become the idea, the name, at the time was the name. I still wonder about. There's a word in Bangladeshi which means I'll come back after the break. I remember the name, which would have been a much better title. We'll come back to that in a second. But the idea was to say
it wasn't Kobe Nazrul Centre by any
no.
chance?
Kobe Nazrul Centre was also there. But
Hanbury Street, yes.
what was wanted was somewhere that was a site that brought people together through the arts, through creating things. Because by creating things together, you bring communities together across bridges. If you look. Just to take one example, the Rich Mix Centre has been around now for almost 20 years, but it
Yes.
has different forms of arts. It works with schools across the borough
Correct.
to bring kids in to write plays, to perform plays. It has numerous artists. Some famous
Fantastic.
artists have been through there. Stormzy went through there. Ed
Fantastic.
Sheeran went through there. But also a
Professor
lot of...
Michael
yeah.
Keith, I'm just going to stop you again because we need to go
You
on a
need to
short
go.
break, but we will continue after the break.
Okay, we'll continue with this.
Ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen, please stay with us. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back straight after the break. Thank you.
Let me put that. Let me turn that off again.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying with us. We are back from our break. As you know, tonight's interview is a profile interview with Professor Michael Keith, who is a professor at Oxford University, and he's also been the former leader of London Borough of Tower Hamlets. I am so grateful to him for making the time to come and join my program despite his very busy schedule. Professor Michael Keith, before we went on break, we talked about the Bangla town regeneration and its recognition. We've talked about the Rich Mix Centre.
Could we finish the Rich Mix for a second? Go on.
You were thinking of the Bengali term which
Yes,
you
sorry.
couldn't remember at the time. What was that Bengali term? Can you remember now?
I can actually, Doris. Apologise for forgetting the area behind the Rich Mix used to be known as a slum called the Jago, and there's even a novel written called Children of the Jago about the horrors of the East End of the late 19th century.
Was that near Arnold Square, was it?
Yeah, near Arnold, which has now been... Arnold Square is part of one of the first exercises in providing social housing for the poor people in London. It was what existed before that development there of that estate, the Jago. And so one of the things we thought of, I think it actually would have been a nicer name, actually. I was outvoted in democratic selection of the title, but
So
some of us wanted to call it the Jago because
yeah.
Jago it also ties in with the Bangladeshi word Jago. So
Jago,
get up and get going.
Jago.
Get up and get going and think of your history. So it's not where you're at, but where you're going that matters.
Right.
And that.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Can I also? I mean, I know you briefly mentioned about the Altabali Park and the Shahid Minar. I'd like to dwell a little bit into that because naming the Altabali Park, there is a history behind it. We all remember the racist murder of Altabali on 5th of May 1978 when he was returning home from work. And after that, the community came out and said, enough is enough, we need to fight back. As a result of that, and we're under your leadership, and I think Jalal was also the chair of regeneration, I think at the time, and Denise Jones was the
also
chair of the Arts Committee. That piece of land, it was very difficult to get, but you managed to convince the councillors to be renamed, which used to be the St. Mary's graveyard or churchyard or whatever it was called.
Well, I mean, it was by that time. I used to take photographs of the signs outside Altabali Park from the late 1980s. There used to be 2 black signs saying Altabali Park. And it had been an enlightened group of people way before I was involved in politics who'd managed to achieve that renaming. But what was interesting at that time was every single year, I've got pictures of this year by year by year, every single time the council would put up Altabali Park in white paint, and somebody would come along with black paint and wipe it over, and it went on, off every year, at least once or twice a year.
Sure.
And so it was always named but never really recognised.
So it was
and I think it's become it was officially changed, and it was officially changed. But what was interesting about once people managed to persuade other colleagues to allow the community mostly funded it. There was some funding from some of the regeneration money as well, but also the funding was raised locally. To put up the Shahid Minar.
Funded by the community, I think 17 or 18 different organisations came forward.
That's exactly right. A lot of organisations came forward and
contributed towards it.
Contributed to that and actually created this space that actually looked serious, and it became something that I don't know whether it's ever been racially abused or vandalised, but as a serious piece of art, it obviously had a gravitas. And the park became increasingly just recognised as being both a historic past. I mean, it's very famous as one of the Itchy parks, actually. So there's a famous song of the 1960s called Itchiku Park, which was actually by the Faces, including Rod Stewart, who's an old man who's still singing. But so the Itchy Parks that gave us Itchiku Park is still there, but it's still, that now is the Shahid Minar is actually respected. People
Of
visit
course.
it regularly. It's where, obviously, on Language Day, there's always a
Of
ceremony.
course, yes,
But
yes.
also when big events happen.
Yes.
When there was the occupation of a square in Dhaka, there was an occupation of the park.
Yes.
When there was a fall of
It's
the
become the hub for
government,
the Bangladeshi community. Whenever they have a
it
problem,
became
they
it
go
became
there.
a site where
Yes.
things
Yes.
go on, and I think that's a politics of recognition, and
Yes.
that is
Yes.
something that's really
Yes.
important to acknowledge.
Yes. And of course, people like yourselves, Jalal, Denise, and many of the other councillors, and please forgive me if I haven't named any other councillors, have really made a substantial contribution as a team to try and get this off the ground and get it up.
Absolutely. We won't talk about the people who objected to it.
No, I think I
Although
can
we
guess who
could
they
do,
are.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of chronological order then, and the achievements that were made under your leadership, in 1997 from 1996 to 2006, there's been a massive development in Shadwell, Watney Market, Tarling States, and the Solander Gardens, which was the housing regeneration. Now, you played a pivotal role in that, in getting the money from various sources, the investment that were needed, because it was considered to be a rundown area. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to recognise it's always controversial. Sometimes when you look throughout Tower Hamlets, the right to buy has worked in very funny ways. So it is honestly the case that the first things that went under right to buy when Margaret Thatcher introduced them, not just in Tower Hamlets but everywhere, what tended to go were the poorest houses and the richest houses. So when you look at Wapping, some of the houses on the riverfront used to be council houses that now sell for £2 million. And they were sometimes bought under right to buy for £40,000-50,000.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's shocking. But also sometimes some of the poorest houses also went. And we know people quite often, if you have a lot of kids and you're stuck in a 2-bedroom flat, and you can take up your right to buy and then get a mortgage in Barking or out of London, that was a number of people also managed that as a way of moving up the economic scale. So one of the problems has always been about how we think about housing in Tower Hamlets, and whether social housing is for everybody, or whether if I live in social housing, I have a right to buy my house. And it's always controversial. It's a complicated subject.
Sure.
But in order to get the regeneration monies, what we had to do was persuade people that it was worthwhile people clubbing together and having estates improved, because at one stage there was a specific piece of work that was done on Shadwell Gardens that showed that the average age of death of Bangladeshi men in the 1990s was almost 10 years less of life than the average age of death of people in Britain as a whole.
Right.
And one of the main reasons for that was the chronic ill health connected with the housing stock in the East End.
Sure.
There was a desperate need to stop the fungus growing, the respiratory disease that was associated with poor housing, the other forms of illness associated with poor housing. And so there was the campaigns were trying to actually create small housing associations that would be controlled by local people. It was controversial because some people feared they would lose their right to buy. And so it's a long, complicated story, but part of the results included things like, on the corner by Shadwell Station, there's a big tower block built.
Yes.
That money was generated from
Winterton
that tower
House,
block.
is it?
No, not Winterton House. On the Cable Street side, there's a private tower block that was built on derelict land.
Yes, right.
And all of the money from that was invested in the Tarling estate.
Right.
So the Tarling estate got lifts, it got refurbishment, it got a new community centre.
Which was very much needed.
And it was completely transformed. It took a long time, a lot of negotiations. It wasn't without a lot of different opinions being shared at the time. But people eventually, like Shundar Ali, like Mr. Ahmed, who was chair of the first Bangladeshi chair of a tenants committee, they came and actually
Supported that.
supported in the end the transformation.
We're talking about Moniruddin
And-
Ahmed and Sundarbai.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Eventually came to support, and that estate was transformed.
Transformed, yes.
And people forget that took a lot of struggle at that time.
Of course,
Just
and of
as-
course at the same time, Watney Market, Solander Garden.
Yes, also
was
got programs
programmed in as
improving,
well,
and you had to prove to the central government that the local government could be trusted enough
Enough
to
get
have
the-
that level of investment put in. And that took
I
a long
I know
time.
you've put in a lot of time, effort, and a lot of energy and a lot of negotiations for that to happen, and to work with the community, because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, because of the community support and support from your political colleagues,
Yeah.
actually made it happen. Can I just kind of move on from that, because I am conscious of the time. So in 1997 to 2006, something very important also happened in Tower Hamlets, and that was regenerations of the 20 or so schools that took place.
Yeah.
And again, you've been very pivotal in terms of ensuring that the schools were updated and was resourced so that children from our community can get the best of education that they deserve.
I think, again, that's right. Again, this is with other people. The leadership on that came from somebody who was, first of all, the head of education and then became the chief executive, who was Christine Gilbert.
Christine Gilbert,
Part of
yes.
this working together is about recognising one of the most difficult things running a council, to be honest, is to have, you see this now, the Labour Party is not doing it very well in government at the moment.
Yes.
The politicians are meant to make the decisions, but you cannot make just decisions alone. You need people to implement the decisions.
Of
So you
course.
need a cadre of people
Of
who are
course.
competent, who are hardworking, and who trust the politicians. And you need a strong relationship of trust
With the
between
officers,
politicians and officers. And in the first 5, 6, 7 years of trying to turn Tower Hamlets around, one of the biggest jobs, which is always behind the scenes, is, to be frank, getting rid of the rubbish and employing people who are competent. What Christine Gilbert did with the schools was identify quite clearly the schools that had head teachers that needed supporting, the schools that had head teachers who were brilliant, who just needed to get on with things, and the schools where the head teachers needed to be booted out, basically.
Yes.
And she turned the education around and gave us the basis, working with people, actually people like Michael Keating to be remembered as well, who actually put the effort in that then generated the position where we could attract the finance to turn those schools into kind of completely new buildings in a very large number of the schools in Tower Hamlets.
Sure,
And that was a major achievement. Again, not without controversy at times, but it made a massive difference. And you see this in the achievement of Bangladeshi kids in particular, but kids in general. In some of the schools, it's not a coincidence, and it's not without the council that schools like Morpeth, which had a fantastic head teacher, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a big fight with somebody stabbed, a white kid and a Bengali kid fighting, and a particular family, and it was all in the news. A head teacher was strongly about turning that school around, but they were supported by the council. If you look at a very famous school where Michelle Obama visits, that is now a consortium that takes over,
Mulberry
of
Place.
course, the
Yes.
Mulberry Consortium that's kind
Yes.
of grown.
Yes.
Again, that involved very charismatic head teachers, and so that needs to be recognised.
A lot of work has gone in the
But
background.
also
yeah.
in the background, people like Christine Gilbert were supporting those
Sure.
people that were running those things well.
Sure.
So it is important.
And what disappoints me nowadays, Professor Keefe, is a lot of people don't know the history. They don't know the hard work that had went on behind the scenes from people like the names that you've mentioned yourselves and others who were in politics at the time.
No, well, and that's why you see. Well, we'll come to it later. But if you look now, it is very sad that Tower Hamlets can't attract good employees to do that work.
Absolutely.
Because there isn't the trust anymore.
Sure. Moving alongside the regeneration of schools, from 1999 to 2000, you've also established the ideas about idea stores in Whitechapel, Chris Street, and I think there's one in Watney Market as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole series of idea stores, and that partly, again, came by discussion. And again, people like Denise Jones needs credit there as well, that a number of people saw that libraries, old libraries, were attracting very few people. The buildings were musty and unfriendly. They were placed in odd situations, and across London, libraries were being closed.
Yeah.
And what we had the idea to do was actually to recognise that we had, first of all, had a very large number of empty buildings that we were calling libraries, but we would never close a library without opening a new kind of concept,
Sure.
which was the idea store, which was to bring together a library and training, and normally have it near places that people go to. Like,
of course, it's a community hub as well.
Absolutely.
As
so Roman Road
Centre.
was one of the first ones. Crisp Street Market was one of the first ones.
Yes.
Whitechapel High Street was one that won the Sterling Prize, the biggest architectural prize in Britain.
Yes.
So we had someone who became famous as the architect who designed the Whitechapel Idea Store, went on for a stellar career in architecture, because we were brave enough to have the new notion of creating idea stores to upgrade libraries into these new exciting spaces.
Sure. Moving on from this, and this is something that's been very close to my heart, and I'm sure it's yours as well, because your mother was born there. And this was a period when I had the opportunity to be a councillor with yourselves from 2002 to 2006. The new Royal London Hospital was built, and again you played a very significant pivotal role in working with the Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, to ensure that it happened. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? What actually happened and how you did things behind the scenes?
To be honest, I think Ken Livingstone did lots of good things. I think there were some challenges to some of the things he did as well, but he actually didn't do very much on the Royal London Hospital. The Royal London Hospital was almost hit badly, weirdly, by the decision to save Barts. Frank Dobson, when the new Labour government came in 1997,
wasn't he?
He was the first health minister, and he had a sentimental attachment to saving Barts, and he did that in his first week. And the original plan had been, by the governments for a number of decades, was to close Barts and have some kind of unification between Barts and the Royal London. Now, the reality was, when Barts was saved, then nobody was prepared to do anything about the Royal London. But it's worth remembering, because this is now self-evident, that the population, I'll get this wrong, but it's roughly right, the population of the area that is now Tower Hamlets in about 1900 was about 450, 500,000 people. From about 1900, it declined and declined and declined, until by the time when we got into power in 1994, the population, again I'll get the figures wrong, but it was about 180, 190,000. The population of Tower Hamlets now is over 320,000. And people who were on the ground knew that was happening. So the argument was, you don't need a new hospital in Whitechapel. You can have this crappy, horrible old hospital,
which was full of asbestos.
It was full of asbestos. It had all sorts of problems. I can remember at one stage when I was leader, I had a very bad back. I ended up having 3 discs taken out of my back, and I went into casualty. And I was actually lying on the floor in casualty because there were no beds to put me. I couldn't sit in a chair because there were no chairs anyway. So I was literally lying on the floor. And Councillor Bodrul Alam actually came into casualty on that day. And he actually came and saw me and asked me if I wanted some help, because people were just walking over me because it was so horrific in that hospital. Yeah. But what we managed to do was make a case that you can see, even in the 1990s, that the population of Tower Hamlets was just going up so rapidly. The
and
case
of course,
for
it's
not
got one
having
of the youngest population as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, and you could see that there was more new buildings. There was growing populations. There was a large Bangladeshi population. Anybody who understood demography, who understood population, who understood urban change, could see what was happening in the future. That Tower Hamlets was almost one of the things I'm most proud of is we adopted a policy in 1998, 99, I think it was, or maybe a year later, to actually start talking about what Tower Hamlets would look like in 20 years' time, saying to people, we are about to have almost a new city, we're almost about to double our population size, let's actually get ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the case we took to government directly. And it was even something which went right the way up to the cabinet. And I actually had to go to 10 Downing Street.
It was a Labour government then, wasn't it?
It was a Labour government, and there was actually a junior Labour minister from Liverpool who actually became very sympathetic and was really helpful in persuading, particularly Tony Blair, actually, to back it. Gordon Brown was against it. I actually went to a meeting in Downing Street where somebody came out who is still quite famous of the meeting, and they said, look, you've got your blank, blank, blank hospital, but get out of here, because what happened was I played a trick that it was coming up to the next election, and he'd given Tony Blair a note to say that the leader of Tower Hamlets and Tower Hamlets Labour Party have just announced, because there's an election coming up, that the Labour Party are going to provide a new hospital in Tower Hamlets. It was completely untrue. We hadn't done that at all.
Right.
But Gordon Brown was objecting, and then Tony Blair just turned him over, and we got the money.
Fantastic.
And so it was actually at that time,
Mm-hmm.
as a result, we now have one of the best hospitals in London.
Listen, it's one of the latest
and
hospitals.
it is incredibly important for
Yes.
the people here.
Yes.
And people forget that that was only done by working with people across all divides, by having a competent group of officers, by having a connection to a Labour government, even if it was a Labour government that were having a row about it, and by using influence with a Labour government to deliver for a Labour council for people across the borough from all backgrounds.
Yeah. I'm also going to go back a little bit now to talk about the development of the East London Mosque.
Yeah.
As we all know, East London Mosque wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
It was a much smaller mosque.
Mm-hmm.
The piece of land right next to it, if I remember correctly, were sold to a developer for housing development.
Mm.
But because of the pressure from the community, that decision had to be reversed, and gave, well, yourselves and other councillors became sympathetic to the request from East London Mosque and from the local community that you reversed that decision and you gave them that piece of land to develop, and part of it to be used as a mosque and part of it to be used for regenerating business purposes. Do you want to tell us how that happened and why it happened?
Well, I think what you say is broadly correct, Doris. I think there are some fine points which need to be said, actually, that it is true that the land, a big patch of land next to East London Mosque, was bought by somebody. It was on the market, it was bought by somebody. They wanted to develop it as a property for sale. It was a big property developer. And most of us didn't even know the land had been bought. And the first I ever knew about it was when a planning permission went to a planning committee from this owner of the new property to build a massive housing development right next to East London Mosque. And the community organised a massive protest about it. Now, I don't need to say, and I'll choose my words carefully, that there has always been a long history of difference between different mosques and between different strands of opinion around those mosques.
Of course, yes.
And actually, on this particular issue, some of the strongest critics of what I did were actually some of my Bangladeshi friends as well as some of the white friends. But what we did at the time was the campaign came and sat down with us, and we talked to them about what would be possible. And it was the case that the council acted sympathetically to block that planning permission, to work with the developer, and to say to the mosque that they helped the mosque get a license where they used exceptional circumstances to use that space as a car park for a long period of time, against what the council rules were, precisely because myself and other people were sympathetic to the fact that there was a need to expand that facility. And some people from some other different traditions, it goes without saying that the history of 1971 resonates today in all sorts of ways that people like yourself know far more than I do, and people in your audience will know far more than I do. But many people criticize me for actually supporting
Yes,
East London Mosque
of course.
at that time.
You were
And,
considered to be, if I may say so, by the
yeah,
stereotype,
yeah.
Bengali lovers.
Well, that was one strand of criticism that came through, and that was, yeah, no, people did say that very, very often. And I tried always to be clear that it's important to celebrate also the white community. My family come from that Irish community. I'm not going to denigrate or forget where I come from as well as where I'm going to. So it's always important. That was the point of Rich Mix and so on. It's important to valorize and recognize the contributions of all communities. But in the context of East London Mosque, to be honest, there were also some Bangladeshi critics, because some people who came from particular traditions that came from 1971 were extremely critical of what we were doing to support East London Mosque. So I lost some friends who are Bangladeshi, as well as being criticised by some friends who are white. But I do think it is important to remember.
Absolutely.
And people like
And
Siraj,
it's one of the largest mosques in Europe, now,
well,
isn't it?
I think
the community is benefiting from it.
I know that some people, I know Siraj Salikin was very involved at those times. He was very cross with the council. Has subsequently at some meetings, I don't know whether he would still say so today, but he's since at sometimes he's been very, very generous in recognising that the council helped a lot at that time, and it was possible to help what has become a major centre.
Yes, yes.
So, and I think that was the right decision. I think it is the case that all aspects of community life need to be valorised, but
of course,
we do need to be fair
and you did
to
that
all
very
communities.
effectively.
Well,
But how many
I
people
hope so.
remember the history?
Yeah.
Professor Keith, I'm going to stop you again because we need to go on another break. Hopefully not for too long. So, ladies and gentlemen, please don't go away. Stay with us, and we're going to go into our final segments and talk about a few other things, and then the current state of politics in Tower Hamlets at the moment. Thank you. How much time do I have in this segment? 12 minutes, yeah? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for staying with us. We are into our final segment, and I don't have much time, but there are a few more areas that I need to cover with Professor Michael Keith. So, Professor Michael Keith, thank you for giving us a rundown of the history of Tower Hamlets and your achievement, along with the fantastic team of councillors that you had when you were the leader of Tower Hamlet Council. Both you and I were unfortunate, and we got booted out in 2006 by Respect. Let's move on. Myland Park. When was that created, and how did that come about?
I mean, that was again working with the community, the Tower Hamlets Environment Partnership, I think they were called. A local NGO had the idea, came to the council. Again, that was something that Denise Jones and myself worked together on quite closely, and it got money from the Millennium Trust to fulfil. There was a planner in the war called Patrick Abercrombie, who made the point that the East London had very poor public space. West London had lots of fancy parks.
Yes, of course.
And the idea was to create a green lung for London and join up Vicky Park, Victoria Park, right the way down to the river.
Sure.
And effectively, that's what we managed to do by raising the money for that and actually regenerating the whole of that area from Victoria Park downwards to create a new Myland Park.
Fantastic creation, I think.
And it's zoned. It's got areas for young people, like at the go-kart area and the skateboard area. It's got an area where we had the idea that basically adults can only go in if they're accompanied by young children, which is the playground area towards the south of the park. But the further north of the park, you've got quieter areas, and an area, the bridge that's designed by the architect Piers Goff, is a bridge that crosses Mile End Road, so you can feel that you're in the park even if you're crossing the road.
Yes.
Up into the northern areas of Bow, which are still quieter and still have community use in places that are, you have big concert venues up in Vicky Park. But it joins that whole green lung together. So
I think a lot of thought went into the planning process.
A huge amount of thought went into it. And you can now walk from Vicky Park down to the river, and it's a beautiful walk where you're in green space the whole way.
Sure.
It's an incredible achievement, and it's an achievement of that time.
Thank you. Two more points before we're going to talk about the current state of politics. The next one is that there was a time when 3 minutes left, right? Okay. There was a time when Tower Hamlets was considered to be one of the most deprived boroughs where education was really bad. Because of the hard work that you've put in and everybody else as a team, Tower Hamlets became the best education authority in the UK in 2005, and we got a
Beacon Award for that, and a Beacon Award for the best social services, and a Beacon Award for the best partnership with the community. We were the first local authority to win 3 in a row at that time.
Well, Professor Michael Keith, thank you for the update and telling us the current history and how Tower Hamlets have moved on. I am now going to ask you about the current state of politics in Tower Hamlets, and we know that the local election is going to happen in 2 days' time, on the 7th of this month, and today is the 5th, so a couple of days. What do you think the current state of politics is in Tower Hamlets, and what are your predictions?
I hesitate to predict, but I know Lutfur Rahman well. I think he is a good person. I've said in all of my politics it's important for all of the communities to work together. I spent a lot of time trying to persuade large numbers of white people that it was wrong for the white people to dominate and exclude the Bangladeshis. I think having a council that is entirely Bangladeshi men is not right. I think it's time to think about working together. I know Farouk Siraj Islam, who is a very decent man. I think it is important to actually have communities working together, to actually think about communities representing the whole of Tower Hamlets, not just part. It's as wrong to have a council that is entirely Bangladeshi men as it was wrong years ago to have the white people excluding the Bangladeshis. And I've lived through both of those things.
Sure.
I think the time is that you only achieve things by working together. At the moment, the council has inspectors coming in because there is no trust. As I said earlier on, you desperately need good, competent people to run the council. I know some of the people in senior positions now. I know the history of the chief executive and the disciplinaries involved with various people in the council that he runs. And so some of the people involved, I think, are the responsible for inspectors running the council rather than the elected politicians.
Sure, sure.
We need to have elected
And
politicians
that
running
is really
the council.
sad, isn't it, when that
It is.
happens?
I think it is very sad. It took a long time to recruit people
Yeah.
like Christine Gilbert and Eleanor Kelly
Sure.
to run the council properly. And I think
So we need to have good, trustworthy bureaucrats working alongside the politicians.
exactly, and you
Yeah.
need to have the politicians drawn from all parts of the community,
Of course,
And I
not
think
just the one sections of it.
not
yes.
just one section of the community. I
Yes,
think
which
that is
is-
what is important.
Sure, sure.
In
Do
terms
you
of,
ever think that and we've only got 30 seconds left, and I need to conclude, that the Labour Party will regain Tower Hamlets again?
I think it will one day. I think it will stand. It's been there a long time. Whether it is this time or next time,
Thank you.
I think it will.
Thank
one
you
day.
so much, Professor Michael Keith, for
Yeah.
coming along and giving your time. Dear viewers, thank you so much for staying with us. I hope this program has been worthwhile. Please keep safe, keep well. Until next time, good night.